Appreciate that. Let's get started. And you know what? I don't have the remote with me. Click, 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 click. See, I knew I forgot something. All right, so a little review. As I mentioned last week, we're not going to go back through the alphabet because you already have it all down pat by now. And I understand if you really don't. Again, it's not a grammar class per se. We do have to cover the grammar enough that you have some familiarity, but we're not testing on the grammar itself. That's reserved for a different class. And hopefully someday you'll find that there's value in expending effort in that regard. But we've gone through the alphabet and the final forms and the vowel, the pointing systems, both the changeable vowels and the unchangeable or the letter vowels. We've also gone through the nouns, absolute noun, and which would function as the nominative or the subject and or the direct object if it has, and normally it has a direct object marker that to help you to differentiate. And also then we kind of touched on the construct noun, where when two nouns are side by side, or two or more nouns are side by side, and the very last in the series would be the absolute noun, and the others would be in the construct state form. That may change its spelling in some cases, not in all cases. And the result would be to put it in the possessive. And we'll see that tonight in our famous verse, by the way. So we'll have a little review in that regard. And then we did an introduction to verbs, and we started by recognizing the three major components of a verb: the root, the stem, and the conjunction. And we watched a video last week, which we won't have again tonight. But ultimately, the typical way to look at it, you have the root, the sharush, it's called in Hebrew. It's the root, and we spent some time looking at roots, and we're going to look a little more at that. And then, of course, you have the stem, or also is referred to as the binyan or binyanim. That een part, that hierarch yod with the final mem, makes it plural. And so it's a binyanim, stems, plural. And there are 7 primary stems. There are some others that I think are pretty vague. I don't even know them, but I think there are some others. And then, of course, you have what is attached to that stem is the conjunctions. And the conjunctions really determine how it functions within the sentence. And we're going to spend a little more time in that regard tonight. As we mentioned, we've looked at how the root system works. And to me, this is the key to understanding and dissecting and recognizing verbs and nouns and such. There's a specific pattern in both between a noun and a verb and adjectives and different types of verbs, different stems, binyanims. These patterns are recognizable once you sort of know what they are. But to know that you have root position 1, root position 2, root position 3, also sometimes recognized as the pei, the ayin, and the lamed positions. And it's called that because when you put the vowels to the pei, the ayin, and the lamed, that's the pa'al. And the pa'al is another name for what's also called the call, and we'll touch on this again. But the point with the root system is that you're really going to add 2 infixes or suffixes or prefixes to these. The vowel patterns, really, the root becomes a stem when you add the vowels, the pointers. They're really not vowels, they're vowel pointers. Vowels didn't exist in the original Hebrew. They were added much later. They existed in the oral, but not in the written. They're added much later in order to preserve Hebrew, the Hebrew language, the written language especially. These vowel pointers, the patterns associated with them, once you add them, will determine the stem, and determines what kind of stem it is, along with sometimes there's a prefix associated with certain stems. And then certain conjunctions will determine the prefix, as well as there's also, I didn't show this last week, I don't know why I left it off. There's also a suffix associated with verbs, which would determine its person, number, and gender. And so the key is to recognize and find the root, look what's added to it, and that it'll help you recognize how that verb is functioning, what stem it is, which would tell you how what voice. The stem is going to determine the voice. It's also going to determine the action of the verb. The conjunction will tell you how it functions in the sentence. And then, of course, the suffix will tell you person, number, and gender, whether it's first person, second person, third, masculine, feminine, masculine, feminine, or common, they refer, well, masculine, feminine, and first person, second person, third person, or common, they have, and we'll get to that later. Yeah?
Don't you mean conjugation rather than conjunction?
Is that what I said? Conjugation? It's not conjunction, because that would be joining together.
Yeah,
this is conjugation.
Okay.
Not congregation, but conjugation. You know, language is not really easy. Thank you. Conjugation, thank you very much. And so when we looked at the root, for example, I mean, the root carries the basic meaning, but until you actually apply a stem or other prefixes or suffixes or infixes, that doesn't have a meaning in of itself. But the root is really just the consonants, the mem, the lamet, and the cough, the final cough here. And of course, you see in the nouns by certain vowel patterns, pointer patterns, and it becomes Melech, the king, or Malkah, the queen, or Malkut, the kingdom. But a different vowel pointers pattern would recognize it as a verb. And here we have, this is actually the call, third person masculine singular perfect verb for to reign or to rule, Malak. And well, I know someone named Malak, young child, his name is Malak, and I always remember thinking, so well, he's going to rule someday. So I think he already rules the house anyway. But anyway. And so we also looked at last week how the stem functions to give the voice as well as the type of action. And the one thing that you really don't get much within the Hebrew, in the Hebrew word, context provides it, but not the word as much, is time. In Greek, we had time, past, present, or future. Hebrew does have time, past, present, or future, but the emphasis is found in the context, not so much in the word itself. And the word emphasizes the voice, active, present, or reflective, or the action, which would be simple, intensive, or causative action. So that's the paradigm that you're really working with. I just got a text from Josh Kaysen, said, Nora just said that, you know, Mr. Dave, he's kind of old. I think thanks a lot, Josh. Yeah. What are you teaching that girl? Anyway, I got to stop looking at my phone. And so the stem is going to give us information about how the verb, its voice, whether it's active, passive, or reflective, and the type of action, simple, intensive, and causative. There are actually seven, I think that's right, seven. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, it says seven. Seven basic verbal stems, or also called binyans, binyanim. The call, which is also referred to the pa'al. The call means simple, and you see at the top there, and you see in the English the call, in the Hebrew the spelling call, and in the English I put there as an alternative name, just identifier. This is just identifying it as a name. Is the another name for call is pa'al, and that's the old grammars, but you'll still find it referenced. And there you see it with the in the Greek and the Hebrew spelling. And then you have the nifal, and then the PL, and the pual, and the hifel, the hofal, and the hippael. Those are the seven. We're not going to go through all seven, but you'll get a feel for the process of all these as we go through the first five: the call, the nifal, the PL, the pual, and the hifil. And so, as we mentioned, that the stem itself, the binyan, provides the voice, whether it be active, passive, reflective, and the action, whether it be simple, intensive, and causative. And here's a little matrix for that, a little rubric here. And so the call, the simple, which is really the baseline for all the verbs, is an active voice and simple action. The other active voices are PL, but that's an intensive action. The difference would be he opened the door. Would be a simple action, right? He opened the door, okay? But to intensify that, what would you say? He slammed the door, right? And that would be active. It's still active because he's doing the action, but it's more intensive. Causative would be something more the effect that, what would you say causative? Probably, I don't know, so the door was open? No, he caused the door to be open. He made the door open, something of this nature. It's causative. He
Push the door.
He pushed it. Well, push would be the action there, and I guess in a sense it could be. I'm not, wouldn't I'd have to really look to see. There's so much, in both in language and interpretation, translation. There's both a science and an art, and context is going to tell you whether or not he pushed it or whether he caused it to open. Push tells you how he caused it, so it's probably right. Carl?
I know we said there was 7 basic stems, but I see 8 up here now.
Well, because the nifal can be both in the passive voice under simple action and reflective voice in simple action. So it's a little bit misleading, but it's still the same binyan or stem. So we have a simple action, the nifal, and really we're going to see that's just a modification of the call. And but it's going to function in a passive voice. Instead of someone opening the door was opened would be, I think, more in a passive sense. I think intensive pual, but still passive, and hopeful. We got some examples in the next slide anyway. And more reflective. As we mentioned, the nifal can be both passive and reflective. Context helps you to determine. I'm not sure how many would be reflective versus passive. I don't. Matter of fact, other than this book, I hadn't seen nifal used as reflective much. So normally it's just focused on it being passive. So probably not very many. And then the intensive reflective, which is normally shown as the only reflectives, is the hippael. And we'll touch on that as we go. The next slide from last week, I modified it a little bit to give us a little better overview. So in the call, the simple form of the verb, here we have the word shama, meaning he heard. Well, this is a simple action and active voice. He heard. And in the nifal, if we take the same word from shama and we put a prefix to it and modify appropriately the vowel pointers, and you get nishma, he was heard. And it's also simple action, but now it's in a passive voice. The shiber would be he smashed into pieces. This is an intensive action with an active voice. The subject is still doing the action, but it's now more intensified. And then under the pual, for the same word instead of shiber, it's shuber, and he or it was smashed into pieces. Again, an intensive action, but now it's more passive in voice. It's something that's done to the object or person. And a causative action for the hipvel, he made he made him or her or him to be king. So it would be an active voice. He made someone king. But it's causative. He caused someone to become king. In the hopval, here we have he was made king. It's we'll go back to the hipvel. You see the vowel pattern. It sounds like hipvel. There's the himlik, the vowel pattern with the hirik underneath the hey, the very first word, and then the hirik underneath the lamed. Well, that's the vowel pattern for hipvel. And so we have the word, in this case, himlik. He made someone king. Change the vowel pattern and make it passive, still causative, and it's homlok. Homlok. He was made king. That is, by the way, a kametz, or a hatef kametz, which sounds like the O sound, not the A sound. If you remember that. And then the last one is the hippael, an intensive action with a reflective voice. And here we have the word he hakbe, he hid himself. And so you get a feel for how these stems are, how they reflect its voice and its action in this example here. Does this make sense so far? Are we okay? Okay. So now we've looked at the root and we've looked at the stem or the binyan, and now we're going to look and build on that and add to it to make it the conjugation, not the conjunction or the congregation, but the conjugation. There are actually, what's here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are actually 8 conjugations. I don't know why the same book in this chart only has 6 of them, but the next chart's going to have all 8. And the other 2 are used quite a bit, so I don't know why it's not here. But it's not. It doesn't matter for our sake per se, because we're going to only focus on 2, the perfect and the imperfect. The others we're not going to spend as much time with, other than an introduction. The conjugations, the verbal system expresses the different functions of the verb, such as perfect. It's a completed action. A completed action, regardless of time, past, present, or future, is still a completed action. The imperfect is an incomplete action or an ongoing action, whether it's, again, past, present, or future. Imperative would be just like we were used to imperative in the Greek or in the English. It's more of a command, demanding some immediate action from the person being addressed. Then you have an infinitive, you have a construct infinitive, and you have an absolute infinitive. Infinitives are verbal nouns. We didn't do that in Greek or participles in Greek because it was just more than we really had time for, not a grammar class per se, and here we're not going to do it as well. But just like in English, infinitives function just the same way in English as they do in Hebrew and Greek. Basically, an infinitive is going to be translated something like it would be to them or to it, or but you have a construct and an absolute form, and then a participle. Participles are verbal adjectives. We got participles in English, we got them in Greek, and we got them in Hebrew. And in English, we normally put an ing at the end of it, and that's the end of it. A little more to it in Greek and in Hebrew, but they are express the type of action such as studying or learning, and it normally functions adjectively, where the infinitive functions more adverbally, although a participle can function adverbally, just primarily adjectively. If you remember, our adjectives can also function as a subject, and they can also function as adjectives, and they also can function adverbally. So it can be a little complex, but there are always clues to help us know where to go and what to do. Here's the big picture, and this is really what we're dealing with. Okay, you have a root, and you have its stem or binyan, and the call stem is what's called the simple form, and the simple form, everything else is derived, built from it. This is why we're going to spend a lot of time with the call stem. Well, not a lot, but more time with the call stem than elsewhere. Typically, when you do grammar, you spend most of your time in call, or it's also called the pa'al, and then you basically, once you've got a handle on that, the rest of them are easy. Now, it takes a little while to get a handle on all the functions or the call stem. Call is really quite simple. You derive some other stems by making some changes to prefixes or to the vowel structure, and that will then put it in the nip file, the PL, the PUL, the hip file, hip file. And then for each one of those 7 stems, you get various 8 different verbal conjunctions. No, conjugations. Not a conjunction, a conjugation. There is a Vav conjunction for verbs, so that's why I'm really off here. I was looking at Vav conjunctions today. We're not going to go over it, but basically, remember our Vavs and nouns would be and this, and that, and this. You could do the same thing with verbs. But anyway, it's conjugations. So there are 8 of them. The 2 that weren't on our list before, the cohortative and the GSOP. I forget exactly how those are used. I don't remember that much. Hadn't used it in a long time, so I'll look it up next time, make sure I know. But any one of those 7 stems, binyans, can have, not in every case, but have a variety of these conjugations. And that's what makes it look so complex, because you basically have a lot of variables with it. It's really, once you get the stem down, and then you look at how, and we'll say the call is modified for the other conjugations, now I got a bad habit. Then you apply that to the other stems. There are certain patterns that show up and they become recognizable after a period of time. We've been looking and we're focusing predominantly what's called strong verbs. A strong verb or strong root or strong consonants are consonants that that aren't easily changed. They don't fall off or change. But there are, and those are the ones we're going to stay with. We're not going to really do any weak consonants. There's a whole matrix of that and makes it look more complex than it really is. And ultimately, basically what we're doing is we have strong and weak verbs, they're called. And we're going to focus on the strong, the call strong perfect, the call strong imperfect. But there's also call weak perfect and a call weak imperfect. The only difference is the consonants have, typically, they'll have gutturals in them. Remember I told you gutturals are something very important to know because they change a lot. You can't put a doggish lane or a doggish forte in a guttural. You can't, which is the doggish lane makes the hard sound versus the soft sound. The doggish forte doubles the consonant. They won't go in the gutturals. The same thing, so that affects the vowel system for a word that has a guttural in it. And if it has one guttural in one position, and if it has two gutturals in two positions, it makes it even more complex. Not complex, it just makes it another variation of it is all because of the different vowel patterns. So the gutturals and the resh are called weak consonants. The yod is called a weak consonant. That's to do with the evolution of the language over years and years and years. Just like in English and in Greek, there were certain letters that were used earlier on that aren't used today. Because even in English, if you go back to Old English to current modern English, there's a change in the alphabet. There's a change in the vowel system. I'm not so sure about vowel system in English, but there's a change in alphabetic systems over time. And so you have that in both Greek and I know you have it in English, and I can't think of what it is, and as well as in Hebrew. So for example, the yod, that's that little small, looks like a comma or just a little small line up top, and the nun, which is the N-looking thing, or it's pronounced like an N-looking thing. Those are called weak. Weak because historically they've been had some changes to it. And anyway, I didn't look all that up, but you also have some weak verbal roots. It's called biconsonantal and geminate. The biconsonantal is simply, there are some, well, we've been looking at a triconsonantal roots, 3 letters, right? Right, 1, 2, 3, right? Root 1, root 2, root 3. You also can have one, just a root with 2. Well, those are weak. They're weak because it's missing another consonant. So there's some changes that occur because it's called a weak consonant, all right? And then you can have some geminate. A geminate is like a Gemini, right? Twins. And so roots that have twin consonants, like 2 baits or 2 dalits or 2 lamets or 2, those are called weak because they have double consonant there. And so changes will occur in the spelling, in the verb formation or the vowel formation associated with that. So I want you to just know that there's a difference between strong and weak verb. We're going to emphasize and only focus on the strong. We won't even go over the weak verbs. If you take the grammar, we'll certainly go over that. But basically all it is if you go back to the root positions, if you go back to the root position, if for example, root 2 right here, we have root 1 is the pay. That's a strong consonant. Root 2, ayin, is a weak consonant. So this would be, or it's a guttural, excuse me. And because it's a guttural, this would be a weak verb. Because the second position has a guttural in it. And so that would affect the spelling. For example, there's some words that require a doggish forte in it. Some conjugations that require doggish forte in that second position, but you can't put it. And that affects the other verbs or the other pointers around it. And so it makes it a little more difficult to recognize. But once you sort of understand, oh, a guttural can't take this, and so it's going to affect other things, you can sort of figure it out kind of thing. So basically that's all it's saying. And so the lamed is a strong consonant. So if you had multiple, you get, they call first position weak, versus second position guttural versus third position guttural and that kind of stuff. And, it's just a way to confuse all of us. So hopefully I succeeded in that. I don't know why I set it up that way to do that. I hope it doesn't do that the whole time. Okay, a little bit about word order in a sentence, in a Hebrew sentence. The typical formation of a sentence or a clause, even a clause, we've had some where we have just the clause, is verb, subject, object. That's the typical order. That is not the only order. As a matter of fact, I won't say it's often, often it's going to be something different. Matter of fact, a perfect verb and a perfect conjugation and an imperfect conjugation will often not be the first. It can be, but not be the first. But the typical word order is verb, subject, object. And why does that matter? Because sometimes, and we'll see tonight, it's not verb, the verb is not the first, it's the second or third. Now, there may be a reason for that. It may be there's some emphasis being placed on the noun that's first. We're going to see that in tonight's word, tonight's verse. Or it may be that that particular conjugation just doesn't like to be first. Some people don't want to be first; they want to be second or third. And but ordinarily, the normal word order is verb, subject, object. For example, we did Genesis 1:1. God created the heavens and earth. Bara Elohim ate Hashmayim. Let's see, Vadet Haaretz. God. Let's see. You got the first one is created. Second one is Elohim, that is God. 8 is a object marker that doesn't get translated. It's telling us the next word is the direct object. So Hashmaim is the direct object, and that has the article to it. And so ultimately it is the heavens. And then we have Va8. 8 also does not get translated. It is a object marker, direct object marker, but it does have the Vav, which is a conjunction. It tells me and so it's the heavens and then you got Haaretz. Haaretz is land or earth, and it has the article to it, and so that is the earth. So God created the heavens and the earth. It's really not overly complex once you begin to recognize the letters, the verbs, and the patterns. And you see there's the verbiage, subject, object pattern. And that is the normal pattern. In this case, you have two objects that's joined with the conjunction and. Make sense? All right, good. Then you have, let's talk a little bit about parsing Hebrew verbs. Just like parsing is to define its function, its parts. Just like we did in Greek, parsing is the process of identifying the verb stem, along with the conjugation, along with the person, the gender, number, and its lexical form. Lexical form is the form you find it in the lexicon, the dictionary, the glorified dictionary. And so here we have nishma, and it's from the Nephal. I know it's a Nephal because I see that it starts with the root is going to be the Shavah, not the Shavah, the Shem, the Mem, and the Ayin. Notice that ayin is that's the root. So root 1 position is the Shem, root 2 position is the Mem, and root 3 position is the ayin. So this would be considered a weak verb because it has a guttural in its lettering, and it happens to be 3rd position guttural. However, it's prefixed with the noon and the heric. That's going to tell me it's functioning as a Nephal. So that's its stem, Nephal. But its conjugation is perfect. And we'll go over that tonight. It's 3rd masculine singular. We'll go over that tonight from the lexical form Shema. And I think Shema means, I forgot now. I want to say to hear, but I don't think that's right. I can't remember now. It might be in something else I have later. I can't remember. I'll have to look it up. Yeah, I'll look it up. I don't remember. And then tonight we're going to move into the call or the pa'al binyan or stem. Of the call stem, it constitutes 69% of all the verbal systems. This is one reason why you spend more time in it. It's the majority. Out of the 72,000 verbs, there are approximately 50,000, more than 50,000 call stems in the Hebrew Bible. And so call stems are active in voice and simple, unnuanced in action. Where a nuance is something that is, how do you define a nuance? It's, I know what it is, but I can't speak it. Somebody look up nuance real quick. It's something that is not specific, but it's sort of something is nuanced. I don't say implied, but it's not specific. No. And so it's unnuanced, meaning it is straight. It is specific. And then the simple action of the call stem is further divided into transitive, intransitive, and stative verbs. That's the same in English and it's the same in Greek. A transitive verb does what? It has received. It has a direct object, and it will the subject. The action of the verb is being done to an object. Intransitive is there is no direct object, and stative is more its being, its state of being. We're going to go over that in a minute. So let's spend some time with the call stem, perfect conjunction, third masculine singular. So the call binyan, the call stem, and when you added some vowel pointers, it's in the perfect if it has the comates and the podic underneath, the first and second position. That one is pretty straightforward. That is the basics of all of it. This happens to be the perfect third masculine singular form. In other words, katal means to kill, or it means, because it's third masculine singular, it means he killed. Now, perfect conjugation can be past, present, or future. Like I mentioned, the Hebrew verbs don't generally emphasize time. Context does, but the verbs itself don't. It only emphasizes the action. But normally, most perfect verbs are going to be at least predominantly translated in the past time. He killed. That's why it has. That's how it would normal translation. But it could be present or future. But its normal would be he killed. If it's perfect present, it would be he has killed, or he have killed. He have killed. He. To make it perfect, you have to put a helping verb to it. Has killed, and to make it. Yeah, I think that's right. To make it futures, he. It's not will. It would be still. You have to have that helping verb to make it perfect. He would have killed, right? Or will have killed. He will have killed. Have to make it future. For perfect in English, you got to have a helping verb. In Greek and Hebrew, you don't. It's built into the verb itself. But anyway, it's normally recognized in a masculine singular. Perfect conjugation is normally recognized past, but it can be present and future. That's what I want to bring out. But I want you to recognize the form. Here's the word katal. The comates vowel or pointer underneath the first position and the podic under the second position. That is what all call stems look like. Unless there's something added to the prefix or to the suffix, it will look just like that. When I see that pattern, see the red, I see that pattern, that's a call stem. I know that automatically. And I know it's a perfect third person masculine singular. That's the form. And that's how we recognize it. And now I know how it's used in the sentence. It's going to be typically a past tense. It's going to be something that's completed, oftentimes in the past tense. And it'll be the third person masculine and singular. And so knowing that, you can build from that. I talked about here transitive verbs. I should have put this in a different order. A transitive verb we mentioned already can take a direct object. Example, the prophet wrote the book. The prophet is the subject, wrote is the verb, so if you say the prophet wrote, you're left hanging. Wrote what? To what? Come on, finish the sentence. You know, a lot of times my wife will talk She's not listening. So she'll talk about something and then she sort of hesitates and I'm left hanging going like, give me the rest. I'm waiting, you know? And so this is what a transitive verb does. The prophet wrote and you're waiting for the rest of it. It takes it needs a direct object to make sense. The prophet wrote would be, oh, so he just sat down and wrote. Well, you're like, wrote what? You know, well, he wrote the book. The verb wrote is transitive because it can take a direct object. In this example, the word book is a direct object of the verb, which we just said. So, also in the intransitive, there is no direct object. The verb doesn't take a direct object. Example, the king perished in the battle. Well, the king perished. The king is a subject. The verb is perished. That's it. He perished. Now, in the battle is a prepositional phrase. It's not a direct object. The prepositional phrase defines when or where he was perished, or even how he was perished, but it's not a direct object. In other words, it stands alone without it. The king perished. Now, you don't know when, how, where, or why, but you don't need it in some cases. So you can add a prepositional phrase to give you more information, but it does not need a direct object. That's an intransitive verb. And then you have stative verbs, states of being. Describe a state of being. In the example, the priest is old. I just got a text that says Dave's old. So I understand the feeling. The verbal construction is old describes the state or condition of the subject. The priest is the subject. The state or state of being is expressed with the form of the verb to be. Is, was, will be. Future has to have a helping verb. And old is an adjective that's used in a predicate form that we say that it is old. And so the state of idea is expressed with various verbs, such as kavod, to be heavy, katon, to be small. Yeah, that's right. And most stative verbs are considered to be intransitive. In other words, they won't take a direct object. Okay, so let's get back more into the perfect, the call. Let's talk more about the perfect conjugation. I already mentioned it. It's used to express a completed action or a state of being, whether it's in the past, present, or future. Perfect forms are most often translated with the English past tense, such as I wrote, or the present perfect tense, I have written. If it's perfect, it has a completed action to it. So in English, you have to have, you have to put it either in the past tense, when you put it in the past tense, or you have to, in the present tense, you have to put a helping verb to it, to show that it's perfect. I have written. You can put I wrote, but that would be a simple past tense and not a perfect. I have written basically says it's a completed action with ongoing results. It's completed, but the results are available for people to read then. Let's see. And so when we look at the call perfect, there are, let's start slowly. The top, we can, the very top one, katal, he killed, is our third masculine singular form. That is the form you'll find in the lexical, in the dictionary, the glorified dictionary. That's always the form, unless it doesn't have one. I don't think that's the case in Hebrew. If I wanted to say she killed, I got to make a change. If I want to say they killed, I got to change it. I got to change it. Now, the root doesn't change. It's still katal. It's still kof, tav, tet, and lamet. That didn't change. But I'm going to change, I'm going to add what's called a perfect subformative or a suffix to it. To make it, if you remember when we were looking at feminine verbs and nouns, we added oftentimes a kamates under the last consonant with and we added a hey consonant to it. And oftentimes when you see that hey with a kamates, it's feminine. And so here, same kind of thing. You add a kamates with a hey at the end. And so you get, I can't read, it's too small for me to read. Let me look up here. Katala, she killed. That's how I know it's third person feminine singular. It's still perfect conjugation. It's still the call stem, but to make it feminine, third person singular, I'm going to add the hey, and I'm going to add a suffix to it. You got everyone okay with that so far? So all we're going to do is change that suffix in order to make it second masculine singular, second feminine singular, first common singular, third common plural, second masculine plural, second feminine plural, and first common plural. Now, point out a couple things here. So the order might be a little unique for us. We normally start with third person. We normally start with, you and I start with first person, first, second, third, we go in order. But already remember, Hebrew's written backwards anyway, right? Right to left instead of left to right. So let's start with, third, second, and first. Same kind of thing. There's a reason that they basically lay it out this way, because the third person masculine singular is the simplest form. We're talking about form now, right? Talking about what it looks like. It's form, it's letters, it's vowel structure. And so it's the simplest one. And so when you modify the simplest one, you're going from third, you're staying in the masculine singular, you go into third feminine singular, then you're going into second, both masculine and feminine singular, then you're going into what's called common. Common we should be familiar with in our postmodern society, where we have masculine, feminine, and neuter. Or what's not neuter? They call it when you don't claim a gender, and you're genderless. I don't know. Like they have the bathroom for anybody kind of thing. So it's common, right? So Hebrew had that long before our postmodern thing. Listen, that's a funny joke. Okay, you have to get it. Jackson got it. I know. So it has common and for first, so it's not first person singular, first person plural, okay? It's first common singular or first common plural. And so it just goes in that sequence, in that order, and you can see basically you're just modifying the suffix. Now, when you modify a suffix, that can change the vowels before it, that come before it. And there's normally a pattern for that. I'm not going to go into it tonight. It's not that significant. But I just want you to see that you basically add a suffix to it, and there's a certain pattern for the perfect suffixes for a third feminine singular, third second masculine, second feminine singular, first common singular, and you can see that pattern there. It's pretty consistent when it does this, and we won't go over it all tonight. I just want you to recognize it. So, and we have the verb that we've been using, katal, and if we want to make it she killed, it becomes katla, she killed. If we want to make it you killed, it becomes, I'm looking at the wrong one, katalta, katalta. And I killed, this would be first common singular, katalti. That lamed with the shava underneath it's silent, but you pronounce the lamed, so it's the katalti. And then you have they killed for third common singular, katlu. And then you have second masculine plural, and this would be a vocal shava under the kof. So that's katal ten, and then you killed second feminine plural, katal ten, and then first common plural, katal nu. You see, my Hebrew is not as good as my Greek, but I need more practice, as we all do. That makes sense. Basically, there's a pattern by you add a suffix to the call perfect stem in order to determine person, number, and gender. All right. So if we look at some other words in the call perfect strong verbs, for example, yashav to dwell, or zakar, to remember, or katav, to write, or shamar, to keep. I think that was the word we had earlier, shamar. Maybe, I don't remember now. Kavatz, to gather. And you see the third masculine singular is the same vowel pattern, right? Kametz under the first position, patek under the second position. And it's all third masculine singular, so you would, all these words, to dwell, to remember, to write, to keep, to gather, would be called perfect third masculine singulars, and then the lexical form for Yashav, Zakar, Katav, Shamar, and Kavatz. And now again, to take those individual words and to put them in a different person, a different number, and different gender, you have changed the suffix. And so you see the third feminine singular, very consistent. It has the kametz under the third position root letter, and it has the hey at the end. So you have yashva, excuse me, all right, that would be zakara, and let me point something out real quick here. Notice under the third feminine singular row, the first position, the yod, the zion, the kaf, the shim, and the kof all have the kametz under it, but it also has a little vertical line next to it. The vertical line there is to tell us that it's not a kametz, not a hatu kametz. It is in fact an a sound, ah, instead of the o sound. They put it there because we looked at syllabification, and what you would normally see is that is the first two. Let's take the yashva under to dwell, third feminine singular. That would be yashva, and so you'd have what's called a closed unaccented syllable. And normally, closed unaccented syllable is where that hatu kametz goes. That kametz, that would make it O sound. To tell us that it's not a kametz hatu for hatu kametz, then they put that little vertical line. That's a long explanation to say that's the A sound, not the O sound. That's why that line's there. I just want you to know there's a reason for that little line, so that because that is in fact what's called a closed syllable, unaccident, and if there's a kametz or that little line with a teardrop underneath it, under that first position, normally that would be a O sound. But to let us know it's not, they put that vertical line there. So that's how I know to pronounce it yashva instead of yoshva. That's how I know to pronounce it zakra instead of zokra. That's how I know to pronounce katva instead of kotva, or shamra instead of shomvra, or kaza instead of kotzav, kovzav. And that's so a long time just to point that out. But if you see it, you're going to go someday, what is that? Now you've been told. If you forget, it's your problem, not mine. I did my job. So. I'm sorry. I'm just trying to be funny. I think Jackson's laughing though. I don't know. Probably not. So again, we go down the pattern. You see that the second masculine singular, it's the same pattern. It has the ending with the tav kametz underneath it. The second feminine has the tav with the shiva underneath it. The first common singular has the tav with the hieroc yod, that is the vowel letter hieroc yod underneath it. The third common plural has the shurik at the end, that is the U sound. And the second masculine plural has the tav with the sigol and the final mem there. And the second feminine plural has at the very end the tav with the sigol and a final noon. And of course, the first common plural has the noon with the shurik at the end. So a pretty consistent pattern. And So once you start, and you do have to learn, if you take a grammar, you have to know this pattern. I've forgotten half of it. I'd have to actually go, before I teach it again, I have to go memorize it all again. But you have to know that pattern. And so that's the perfect, perfect strong verbs. That's all there is to it. That's it. Now there's variation when you go to weak verbs, because a lot of things happen with those weak verbs. The yo doesn't like to, sometimes that yo will change to a hey, sometimes the hey will fall off, sometimes the vowel system pointers will change because if the guttural won't take a doggish, and other vowels have to change to compensate for that doggish not being there, and so there's reasons for it, but it feels and looks a little more complex. But if you know this and you understand why things change, it's really not so complex. There's just a lot of variables. And if you understand why it changes, it's not so hard. We're not going to spend time on that because it's not really a grammar class. But that's all there is to call perfect strong verbs. Not overwhelming, I don't think. Everybody awake?
Yes.
Okay, so now let's go from call perfect, keep the same stem, it's still call, go to imperfect conjugation. All right, so the imperfect conjugation is used to express an incomplete or habitual or customary action, whether past, present, or future. Where the perfect conjugation was a completed action, the imperfect is going to be an incomplete action. Notice we're not talking about time, although it can be past, present, or future. We're talking about the type of action. It's incomplete or habitual, something that's continuously ongoing, In Hebrew, the imperfect verbs are most often translated by the English present tense. I study my Hebrew. Well, that's an ongoing event. Or in future tense, I will study. And that's something I intend to do. Haven't done it yet. And so the imperfect encompasses that, the incomplete action. It's an ongoing or habitual or customary action. It looks similar to the call perfect, but we're going to add something to it. We're going to change the vowel pattern. Now, the red is what you want to recognize most often to find for the imperfect. You're going to have a stem because we're still dealing with the cough, tet, and lamed root consonants. That hasn't changed. Instead, we added a suffix or prefix to it with the yod and the heroic. And we changed the vowel. Instead of having the kamates under the first position, we got a shavah. That's simply because we added a suffix or prefix to it. But we also changed the second root position of vowel. Instead of having the potic under it, we have the holum, the O sound. That's the pattern. So if you recognize the pattern, even if the yod in the first position becomes a tav or some other letter, that same vowel pattern with the holum and the O in the second root position, and that's going to help you to recognize the called imperfect conjunction. So here, this is yeet tol. As a matter of fact, a lot of grammars, when you read it, they're going to call this the yeet tol imperfect. Yeet tol refers to the imperfect conjugation. Third masculine singular. You can see it's yeek. The yod with the heroic underneath it, and the cough with the shavah underneath it. That's a silent shavah because it closes the syllable. So it's yeek tol, and that is an imperfect conjunction, third masculine singular. Again, we have a different pattern for both. We're adding a prefix and a different pattern for the suffix. This is where it can look complicated. There are some similarities in the patterns between the call perfect and the call imperfect, but they're, not the same. Let's just say. So where we had in the call perfect katal, he killed. In the yeet tol, he will kill. And you see, all we did is we added the yod with the heroic underneath it, and we have, to show the change, the holum above the tav, that little dot above the tav, should be in red. And so that's yeet tol, he will kill. So the performer or the prefix is the yod with the heroic. To make it third person feminine singular, I'm just going to change, instead of the yod, I'm going to use a tav. And the tav will still have the here underneath it, the little dot underneath it, the little I sound underneath it, and it's still going to have the holum, the O sound, in the third or the second root position. That's the pattern. That's what you're looking for. And then you know it's an imperfect conjugation. And so third feminine singular is tikto. It says the third masculine singular was yikto. The third feminine singular is tikto. She will kill. Second masculine is actually the exact same thing. And matter of fact, my next chart I think is going to show that. The exact same thing, tiktol, and tiktol is going to be either a third feminine singular or a second masculine singular. Context is going to help you to determine whether it's talking about a feminine or masculine person or thing. So it is she will kill, or second masculine is you, which, you being masculine. So it's going to be one or the other. A second feminine singular, it's a little more complex because you have both a prefix and a suffix. The prefix is the same as we've already seen in the third feminine singular and the second masculine singular. Second feminine singular has the tav with the heric underneath. And we have the suffix with the heric yod. Remember, the heric yod is a vowel letter. Now, because we added a suffix to it, there are some other changes that occurred. Like with holum above the tav is gone. Well, that makes it a little harder to recognize, but ultimately, because I know that suffix is there, I can know that the changes are going to occur. And so this would be pronounced, tiktali. Tiktali. The tik is one syllable, ta, that's a vocal shavah, and li would be one syllable, tiktali. And that is you, feminine singular, will kill. In the first common singular, the pattern does change a little bit here. Instead of having the here, notice the first, the prefix has a here underneath every single prefix except for the first common singular. It has this ago. I don't know why. It's just a little different. But I do see the holum come back to us under the second root position. That is that dot above the tav. And so we have, remember, the aleph is silent. And so this is ektol. Ektol, I will kill. In the third masculine plural, we once again come back to our yod with the here. Now notice a pattern. Second masculine singular, third masculine plural, both have the yod with the heric underneath it. Then the others all have the tav with the heric underneath it, both in the plural and the singular, except for the first common and the first common plural. First common singular, first common plural. You can just count on the first common to be different, singular and plural. But you do see a pattern where, one, I see a heric underneath everything except for the first common, and two, I see my third masculine and my third masculine singular or plural has that yod with the heric underneath it. And then the third masculine plural, I got the yod with the heric, as we mentioned, but instead I do have a suffix, and the suffix, because I have a suffix, that changes the vowels. And ultimately, my holum over the tav, the dot of the tav went away, and so I get yiktalo, yiktalo, yiktalo. They will kill. Third feminine plural, tik tolna, tolna, tik tolna. That's tik tol na. They will kill in the feminine. Now, because I have its suffix as a noon with the comments in the hey underneath that, I know it's feminine. Remember that comments hey tells me it's feminine, and just because I got the new at it doesn't change anything. Second masculine plural, tik talu, tik talu. You will, masculine plural, kill. And second feminine plural, tik tol la, tik tol la. You will kill, feminine plural, second feminine plural. And then our last first common plural, nik tol, nik tol. we will kill. I don't expect you to memorize it. You don't need to memorize it. I just want you to recognize and see how it functions and what that pattern, you might at least recognize some patterns. The more time you spend with it, the more patterns you recognize over time. Did I lose everybody? Just half of you? Didn't lose? No, everybody's okay? How about that? All right, and so I mentioned before the third feminine singular and the second masculine singular are exactly the same, only context will tell you how it's functioning. And the third feminine plural and the second feminine plural are also exactly the same, and context will tell you how it functions. Normally it's pretty obvious. It's either feminine, it's pretty straightforward, second person or third, normally not too hard.
But
Yes, sir.
I'm just thinking, and I don't want to jump track of it, but if I'm looking at this review, I'm saying the basic sentence structure is a simple sentence structure. It's not a lot of adverbs, anything added to the word simple structure. But when I read the Bible, I'm getting more than that. Is that in the translation that was that they added?
No, actually, well, we haven't done like pronouns and that's some other things and adjectives and such, but those are in. And what we find is a lot of the verbs, especially, but some of the nouns too. Matter of fact, you'll see that in our we're getting ready to do here momentarily our famous verse of the day, of the week. And but basically, no, there's not a lot of additives in an English translation. There are a lot, don't get me wrong, because there's not a one-for-one translation, doesn't exist. And most of our English Bibles will put them in italices, the fact that they had to add it to make it understandable in English. And actually, we're going to see that tonight. I'll show you that, Carl, in just a minute. Matter of fact, I think it's coming up here in just a moment. So we've been working with the word yiktol, which is he will kill, and we've looked at it in its various person, number, and gender forms, and so for an imperfect, we're going to not only change the suffix, but we'll also require a change in the prefix from the call. The call perfect is very plain. There's no prefix to it. You only have a suffix determine masculine, determine number, gender, and person. But in the imperfect, we'll add a prefix as well as, in some cases, a suffix. Not every case, but some. And so we have the same words we had before. I think they're the same words, maybe not. No, they might be different. Zakar, to remember, these are also the ones at the very top are in the call perfect form, third masculine singular. That's the lexical form. So zakar, to remember, katab, to write, shamar, to keep, kavats, to gather. And if we're going to make it in the imperfect, we're going to add a prefix to it. We're also going to add, in some cases, a suffix. And that's what the same words are done. Notice that we see the same pattern for zakar. We have yiks kor. So you see you have the yod with the hirik underneath the first prefix, but you still have, and this is really important, that second root position. It's important to recognize the vowels because that's where most often determine or its indicators are. And so in the second root position, that's under the cough, you have the holum, that is that dot at the top, the O sound. And so you have yitz kor, and that is the third masculine singular form, the imperfect conjugation for third masculine singular would be he will remember. Instead of he remembered under the perfect, it's in the imperfect, it would be he will remember. And you can see the various forms. I'm not going to go through them all. I wish they had it in red. I started to make the changes, but I'd have to rewrite the whole thing, and I was rushing for time, so I didn't want to rewrite it. So, any questions? You can see how the pattern works. The pattern doesn't really change. You might have some variations because of some gutturals or some other changes that are necessary, but generally speaking, you have a pretty consistent pattern. Make sense? All right, let's try our famous verse. Okay, anybody recognize it? No, that was a joke. But you should recognize something. So let's start with the very first word. Very first word is et, and we've had et before. It's not a word, it's translatable. It's a marker. What kind of marker is it?
Pronounce it.
No, not pronunciation. It has nothing to do with pronunciation. It marks the word it's attached to or next to or before. Why is it marking it? Well, the noun next to it is either going to be the subject or a direct object. How do I know if it's a subject or the direct object? I put a marker in front of it to tell me it's a direct object. That's the marker, et. Now, sometimes it has a segol versus a sere. This is the segol. And so it's et. What's this word? We've had this in almost every single one of our famous verses.
The man.
No. Yod, hey, vav, hey. Yod, hey, vav, hey. Yod, hey, vav, hey. That's the letter. That's the consonants. Yod, hey, vav, hey. That's the consonants. Yod, right? I'm going to point for guys online. So you guys online, look at me. That's a joke. Yod, hey, vav, hey. I didn't do the vowels. I knew the Shabbat, just the consonants. Yod, hey, vav, hey. We don't pronounce, the Jews didn't want to pronounce this word, so they would often say Adonai, or they would say Yod, hey, vav, hey.
Yahweh.
Yahweh. Yeah, we've had this word every single time. So, so this is not the subject. So how would you pronounce, how would you translate Yod, hey, vav, hey?
Lord.
Nope.
L.
No. L would be God. Well, it is.
Adonai?
It's well, they normally would say Adonai, but it says Yod, hey, vav, hey. You remember it says Yahweh. They would say Adonai. They wouldn't read Yahweh out of respect and reverence for the name of God. Instead, they would just say Adonai, or maybe Yod, hey, vav, hey. I don't know, but it is God, right? I think, or unless I got it backwards, I think that. No, it's Lord. I'm sorry, I got it backwards. I always get that mixed up. It's Lord, right? Adonai, Lord. It'd be the small caps Lord, right? So when you see in your Hebrew, your Old Testament Bible, and it's got small caps Lord, that's Yod, hey, vav, hey. So when you look at it and you see the Lord, it's got small caps, that's Yod, hey, vav, hey. And I'm pretty 99% sure that's accurate. So, and so the very first word is not actually the subject, is it? It's got a direct object marker, and it's Lord. Now the next word actually is a word we've had before, but they made some changes to it, which we did not go over to make it possessive. We didn't go over possessiveness, and let me make sure I'm looking at something right here. Hold on a minute. I thought I wrote some. Oh, it's on my next page. Okay. Yeah, it's coming up later. So I'll do that later. This is, normally this would be Elohim, which would be God. But they changed the ending just so to make it your God. The Lord your God. So the your is embedded in the noun, your God. So the subject is the Lord your God, and then you have the very last word, which is the verb, and here it is actually the imperfect. Cal imperfect, second masculine singular. It is, well, we'll get to that in a minute, but it's pronounced tira. So you have the tav with the hirik underneath. It's a hirik yod. That's a hirik yod letter. And so you have the resh with the kametz underneath it and the aleph at the end. And so your consonants, your root is the tav, resh, and aleph. The hirik yod is a vowel. It's not part of the consonants. So my root is the tav, resh, aleph. And it's tira. And there's a reason I don't have well, I'll get to this in a minute. So let's look at the pronunciation of it. I didn't try to divide up 8 Yahweh But in our pronunciation of Eloheraka, that's on our, it's a ka. That's a final cough there. It looks funny, but the aleph with this short reduced vowel of the sigol, that's and then the next syllable is the lo, and then the next vowel or syllable is the he, and that's a hey with a sigol, yod sigol, sigol yod, and then the final is the final cough with the kamates under it, so it's ka. So it's Eloheka, Eloheka. The last word is the tav with the vowel letter here, yod, so it's T, and then the ra at the end, so T-ra. And so let's start. It says, we already know it's the Lord. Let me do it this way here. And so the red is an additive to it. The et is a direct object marker. It's not pronounced. Yahweh would be Lord. I think that's right. I keep getting this backwards. Yeah, Yahweh you put is Lord. Just my English translation doesn't really coincide with. Yeah, okay, it is. That's correct. It is Lord. Okay, now I know I'm looking at it wrong. All right, so it's the Lord Elohera, that is your God, the Lord your God, because the red at the end with the yod and the kamates under the hay should be red, but I couldn't make it red. And the resh, or the cough, final cough with the kamates under is also an additive to make it second person plural, your, possessive. And then the oh, that's right, I was wrong. It's so the verb is tira, and the root is the yod resh aleph, not the tav. The tav is the prefix added for the third masculine singular. We just went over the third masculine singular imperfect, and they add the prefix with the tav with the hirik underneath it. So that verb will help you answer know what it is. The Lord your God, and the verb is fear. Anybody know what it means now? Literally, it is the Lord your God you shall fear. Literally, okay? Now, we translate it, typically, you shall fear the Lord your God, you shall serve him and cling to him, and you shall swear by his name. That's the whole verse, Deuteronomy 10, verse 20. But we just did the first part of that. It is literally the first part, the Lord your God you shall fear. We rewrite that in English to say, you shall fear the Lord your God. That's why I was having trouble, because I know the Lord is the subject, and I'm reading you shall fear. Wait a minute. The Lord is the subject. Your God is the direct object, and it's referring to you shall fear. That is the cow imperfect second masculine singular tikra, tira. And did that confuse everybody? I hope so. I worked hard at that. Hope not. I'm sorry. Deuteronomy 10, verse 20. The very first part of Deuteronomy 10, verse 20. Et Adonai, et Yod-Heh-Vav-He, Elo Hedra, Elo Heka, Heka, Elo Heka. I'm used to Elohim, but Elo Heka, Tira. And that is the Lord your God you shall fear. You shall serve him and cling to him, and you shall swear by his name. Now, this is an example where the verb is not first. Instead, the direct object, not even the subject is first, the direct object is first. And it could be, and it's probably because they're putting emphasis. So our English translation loses that emphasis. emphasis. It is the Lord your God you shall fear. When we say you shall fear the Lord your God, you lose the same emphasis on the Lord is the emphasis. And your God you shall fear. It's a bit of a shame. And my daughter's calling me, tell her, well, we'll take a break right now. Anyway, yeah, that's all I wanted to bring up there. Any thoughts or questions? Let's take a 5-minute break. All right, we'll get started back. It's a problem with reading in English while you're trying to think in Greek or Hebrew. You're not good in Hebrew anyway. You shall fear the Lord your God, but the emphasis is on the Lord your God you shall fear. And so the subject is the Lord. Let's move on and talk about some exegetical principles. And so far we've been looking at the book, or some of the inputs are from the book on how to understand and apply the Old Testament, 12 Steps from Exegesis to Theology by Jason DeRucci, and some of which we've had some input from our last book summary we looked at, but he's added some other perspectives, and it's always good to look at other perspectives. He breaks it down into 5 components. Tokma, sounds kind of Hebrewish, don't it? Tokma, it's really text, observation, context, meaning, and application. Or to look at the text, what's the makeup of the passage, observation, how is the passage communicated, context, where does the passage fit? Tonight, let's look at the meaning. What does the passage mean? The goal here, and the next week we'll look at the application, why does the passage matter? The goal here is under meaning, what does the passage mean? Consider how your passage connects to the Bible's overall story. A lot of mistake that people make oftentimes is they look at a passage within its own little context without connecting it to the entire biblical narrative, the meta-narrative. If we look at the overall Bible story or the message, it always points to Christ, the salvific plan, the plan of salvation from God. There's always a connection. I would say always, I'm not an expert in this, but I believe you can find most always God's biblical narrative, meta-narrative, his overarching plan from Genesis to Revelation is his plan to redeem his people. The plan of salvation, the salvific plan. The goal is to discern or to look at how your passage aligns with the whole Bible. To assess key doctrines specifically, especially in direct relation to the meta-narrative of the Bible. Oftentimes we look at doctrinal issues, some look at doctrinal issues independent of the rest of the harmony or the meta-narrative of the Bible, mostly because we do eisegesis, we inject our own background, biases, perspective, presuppositions into the text versus drawing out, exegeting from the text. And so the goal is to align or understand how your passage aligns with the bigger picture, the narrative, and assessing key doctrines that's associated with your passage and the big picture. So in other words, you cannot look at it independent of the rest of Scripture. It's value of looking at it somewhat independently, but you cannot do it in without. Well, let me just say it this way: one cannot focus so much on the passage at the detriment or the exclusion of the rest of Scripture. From the Old Testament to the New, the story is the same. Whether you're talking Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, on down through Revelation, God's plan to redeem his people is embedded in the words. And they're there in various degrees or forms. The Scripture story of God's glory in Christ, the Scripture depicts God's glory in Christ. And it's within that framework, this salvation historical connections are visible. And DeRucci says that there are 5 different ways that you could see it. You can see it in thematic development, themes, the theme in Genesis, the theme in Exodus, the theme in each one of the books, the theme development, how it develops. You trace the theme through the storyline from Genesis to Revelation. You follow the theme all the way through. And so there's a thematic development that occurs. A theme which will occur in Genesis may get modified or expanded upon in the New Testament. Matter of fact, it will get expanded upon or even redirected in the New Testament. That's one way. We're going to look more at that here momentarily, especially this next one. Besides a theme perspective, there's a covenantal continuity or discontinuity in some cases. When you look at the various covenants, you compare and contrast how those covenants progress and maintain or transform in God's relationship with his people throughout time in the world. His covenants are laid out in a progressive fashion for us to understand more about God's nature over time. And so that's one approach, is the thematic development of looking across Scripture historically, covenantal continuity or discontinuity of looking at the covenant transitions or progression. And then there's the type-antitype. G.K. Bill is a famous scholar. He defines typology. A lot of people struggle with types and antitype. Antitype doesn't sound normal. It's the opposite, or it's against the type. That's not quite right. He defines it as follows: the study, of analogy corresponds among revealed truths about, so you have revealed truths about persons, events, institutions, and other things within an historical framework of God's special revelation. Now, God's general revelation is his creation, right? His world. That's his general revelation. His special revelation is his word, and he's provided for us. So he reveals truths about persons, events, institutions, and other things within an historical framework. Historical framework for Genesis is different than it is, say, for Revelation. He reveals truth in it within the historical framework of God's special revelation, from which a retrospective view of a prophetic nature are escalated in their meaning. In other words, by God's design, types are prophetic and prospective in nature. They're a type. Moses is a type of Jesus. And so he is a prophetic example in various forms of Jesus, of the Christ, the Messiah. Ultimately, all types culminate in the life and work of Jesus Christ. All. And we mentioned, for example, the ultimate prophet like Moses, to whom people were listening to, Deuteronomy 18:15, and who, through his death and resurrection, performs a second and greater exodus. So you have Moses, like the prophet that people listen to, who led the exodus, where Jesus is, through his death and resurrection, is the greater exodus. In Luke 9, verse 30 through 31, and also verse 35, also Acts 3, 20 through 22. Christ is the substance of all old covenant shadows. Whether you're talking about the temple, whether you're talking about the festival, whether you're talking about the new moon, whether you're talking about the Sabbath, or any of the like. In John chapter 2, verse 19 through 21, Colossians 2, verse 16 through 17, and then the one that I want to bring out, bring out in a minute here. So you have the type-antitype. Let's look in Luke 19, verse 30 through 9. Luke 9, verse 30 through 31, very quickly, and Luke 9, verse 30 through 31. Well, that's not right. All right, it's not the right verse. I don't know what I was looking at. Verse 35. Yeah, that's not right. I don't know. I'll have to correct that. I apologize. I must have wrote something wrong. Oh, I'm in John. No wonder that doesn't look right. That doesn't look right at all. Okay, so you have, for example, in verse 30, I'm in Luke 19. That still don't look right. No wonder. Somebody, take over for me, and I'll just sit down and listen. Luke 9, verse 30. And behold, two men were talking with him, and they were Moses and Elijah, who appearing in glory, were speaking of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. So you have this depiction of in the Transfiguration of those types that Jesus, he's the antitype of Moses and Elijah. You have the prophets, the law and the prophets. Jesus is the antitype. Moses represents the law. Elijah represents the prophets. And so he represents the Old Testament, the Old Covenant through Moses and Elijah. So that's the concept of types and antitype. You're probably already familiar with it. We won't spend any more time with that unless you have any questions. So also another approach, you're talking about theme development, you're talking about covenantal development, you're talking about type and antitype development, also promise and fulfillment. A lot of promises made and a lot of promises fulfilled. Fulfillment grows out of predictions. Paul's declaration in 2 Corinthians verse 20, 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 20, that all promises of God find their yes in Christ. Get that, right? All promises of God find their yes in Christ. We should remember that. An example here is in Micah 5, verse 2, was the declaration of the royal deliverer, which will rise out of Bethlehem. Well, that's fulfilled in Matthew's declaration in Matthew 2, verses 5 through 6, with Christ's incarnation. And then I want to touch on something that's I just had it and I just thought about doing it. So I gave you a handout from the Gospel of John, outline chapter 7, 1 through 52. We're not going to go through the whole thing. We don't have time. It's a fascinating study. I did this a while back for some class I was doing. And you depict and you see in John chapter 7, the last Passover, and Jesus remains in Galilee. He taught. He healed many, he fed over the 5,000 in chapter 6, and about 6 months have passed, and so it's the Feast of the Tabernacles coming, and his brothers ask him if he's going, and these kind of things, and we won't go through all that. But he's only about 6 months away from his death, and so it's the Tabernacle Festival. It's a 7-day event. It's important to recognize this. It's a 7-day event. There are numerous sacrifices that daily of bulls, rams, and lambs. So just imagine how much commotion, noise, blood that's running in Jerusalem, and each day was included this water procession, and this is important. And then at the end, at the 8th day, they add, which would include the celebration and sacrifices, while people sang and dismantled their booths. This is the Tabernacle Festival is also called the Festivals of Booths. And so in John 7, there are some groups of people. I'm not going to go into that. I don't want to go to the whole lesson. But I want to go to page, we'll skip down because I want to just cover that intro stuff. But go to page 30, page 4 at the very bottom. And let's go to John chapter 7 and read verses 37 through 39. Okay, but let's set it up before we do. And so here we have this prophecy fulfilled, promise fulfilled in Christ. And it's fascinating when you think about this procession, this water procession, every single day. They'd have this water ceremony that people would watch and follow along with and sing the Hallel songs from Psalm 113 to 118. It's a very solemn, joyous occasion. And it's the priest in a very solemn procession would go to the south border of the city to the Gilham Springs. They would fill the golden pitchers of water. They'd carry it back to the water gate. The priest would climb on the altar steps and pour the water onto the altar. And all this time, the priest would be chanting from Isaiah chapter 12 and verse 3, "With joy you shall draw water from the wells of salvation." And then all the people would follow, and they'd be carrying the branches of the trees from the wilderness, the booths, and they'd be singing from Psalms 113 to 118, the Hallel songs. And then and they do this every single day. And on the seventh day, this procession occurred 7 times. Reminds me of Jericho. Yeah, 7 times. That had to have been an amazing sight, with the singing, with the this joyous occasion of the water being poured onto the altar. It's really a cleansing of the altar. And then now let's read verses 37 through 39. Now, on the last day of the great day of the feast, Jesus stood and cried out, "If anyone is thirsty, let him come to me and drink." Let's stop for a moment right there. Oftentimes when we read this, but understand the crowd that's there, and 6 days before having this procession going at the end of each day with the water procession to cleanse the altar, and the singing and the people and the noise and the chaos and commotion that's ongoing. And here, this last 7th day, 7 times they do this. At the end of this, Jesus stands up, and he didn't just say, he yelled out, "If anyone is thirsty, let him come to me and drink." What symbology in reference to the events that were before him and the people witnessing, and he's making this claim. And then he says in verse 30, "He who believes in me, as the scripture said, from the innermost being will flow rivers of living water." And so Jesus is making this fulfillment of promise, and that the living water would flow. And that's, I wanted to bring that out because I just really enjoyed that. When I did that study a long time ago, I remembered it when I was looking at this, and I said, well, let me pull that out. So anyway, so promise and fulfillment grows out of predictions, and as we said in 2 Corinthians chapter 1 verse 20, all promises of God find their yes in Jesus Christ. Also, there's the another. So you have a theme development across time, across the ages, the epochs. You also have the I'm tired here. You also have the covenantal the covenantal continuity or discontinuities, the type and the antitype. You have the promise and fulfillment predictions that carry through the old covenant, the new covenant, and typically the old covenant, the promise and the fulfillment, oftentimes, sometimes in the old covenant, but oftentimes in the new covenant. And then you have the use of the Old Testament in the New Testament. It's the way we assess the way in which the later biblical writers, the Johns, the Mark, and the Pauls, and the James and the Judes, they interpret or apply their understanding, or their application is the application of the Old Testament to Christ, and so that's another different perspective that gets in terms of how to look at. Really, we're talking about biblical theology in effect. I want to kind of show some examples of different ways. One way he speaks to is what he called God's kingdom plan. It's an acronym he uses, kingdom. So in the Old Testament narrative, there's the foundational narratives of which we find the kickoff, that is the creation, and rebellion. The K is kickoff, kingdom. Creation, and that kickoff and rebellion is found in the creation, the fall, and the flood. And so you have also the fall, the exile, and the flood. You have the I in kingdom for the instrument of blessing. That is the patriarchs. The offspring, which is a promise fulfillment. The promise of Abram and his offspring. And the land promise, promise fulfillment, and the blessing to all nations, a promise fulfillment. And then you have the end and kingdom for the nation redeemed and commissioned. It is, you find in Exodus in the Sinai wilderness, that is the dividing of the Red Sea, the giving of the law, the penal substitutionary atonement, conquest of the kingdom established, and then the G for government in the land, the conquest and the kingdoms. And then 5 for under the Old Testament narrative, dispersion and return as the exile, and then the restoration. And in the New Testament narrative fulfillment, he talks about how the overlap of ages, Christ's work and the kingdom. Well, he says Christ's work in the church age. I take exception to the implication associated with church age as denominational thinking would separate that from the kingdom. And of course, we understand in Matthew 16, verses 18 and 19, the kingdom and the church are parallel. The kingdom is inaugurated in the church and consummated at the second supper of the Lamb when Christ returns again in the second advent. So you have the overlap of ages through Christ's work in the kingdom, and you have also the mission accomplished through Christ's return and the marriage supper and the kingdom consummation. Notice that the book has a denominational slant, and so I did change that slant for our class. In the next slide, he actually gives it a pictorial representation of the exact same thing. This is the exact same thing, sort of an acronym with a pictorial representation to help sort of recognize it. And he's got a little index at the bottom here for kingdom. We already talked about kingdom as in the Old Testament narrative, kickoff and rebellion. And you have creation or paradise and joy. That's what the tree represents. And the fall, of course, is the apple eaten. We don't know if it was an apple, but I guess that's what we're going to use in the pictorial. And then you have the exile depiction of paradise lost. And then you get the flood, and so the waters of judgment and so forth. So this is another way of depicting it. I thought it was kind of interesting, but now that I look at it again, I'm thinking I'm not overly impressed. But it is kind of interesting. This correlates back to the chart we just looked at, except it's in a more graphic representation. So it has the exact same things that we talked about. I won't go through them all again. If you look at it, you can recognize the symbols. They have the symbols would be under I is the instrument of blessings. There you have it's hard to read the small writing. The patriarchs is the first one, and then you got the little stars are the promise of the offspring. When the stars are filled in under the N, that is the fulfillment of the offspring. And so you see that fulfillment under the N, the fulfillment under the O, and then the M. And of course, the O is for overlap of the ages, and the M is the mission accomplished. The N is for nation redeemed. There's fulfillment promises done and during those phases of time. Let's look at a different perspective. I want to get to a couple others. So another perspective is looking at it from a covenantal narrative. We can compare and contrast how the progress of covenants, how they transform or how they escalate or grow in God's relationship with his people and God's relationship with the world. These covenants are interwoven into the God's plan of salvation and his history as time progresses in overlapping covenants. And it recognizes here the five major overlapping covenants: the Adamic covenant, the Noahic covenant, the Abrahamic covenant, the Mosaic covenant, and the Davidic covenant. I'm trying to remember what the Adamic covenant would be. I think that's and I should have looked at this up in advance. I know the Noahic covenant is the promise not to flood again, all right, to destroy in this manner. I know the Abrahamic covenant, there are several, the seed promise, the many nations promise, the land promise, these covenants. And then the Mosaic covenant, the Old covenant, the Sinai covenant, the law. The Davidic covenant is nations or king covenant. And we see those fulfilled in Christ. And so he depicts it with this kind of neat little hourglass that all flows from the Old covenant, the Old Testament, into the new, where Christ Jesus is the fulfillment of these covenants. And so it's interwoven in the progressive historical actions and events of time of God's plan. The interrelations of these covenants is portrayed in that hourglass, where Christ is the center and the old flows. The Adamic, the Noahic, the Abrahamic, the Mosaic, the Davidic covenants are all named in light of their covenant head or the mediator, Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, and King David, and through whom God entered into relationship with. The new covenant is titled, though, in light of contrast to the old. In other words, the new covenant is in contrast to the old, and the old Mosaic covenant, and it provides a climax to God's purpose in history. You see that in Jeremiah 31, verse 31 through 34, and Hebrews 8, verse 6 and 7. 6 through 13, I think it is. I want to spend a little time on this next slide. You probably can't read it on the little handout you have, but you do have it at home in the larger form that is probably a little more readable. This I had to develop when I was in a class I took a while back. And I like it, not because I developed it, because I actually developed it using the methodology from a guy named Lentz to evaluate a framework for our convictions. And that framework, as I looked at it, starts with God's revelation to humanity. And so the big picture, that's why the top outer circle, outer square is God's revelation to humanity. Everything fits within God's revelation to humanity. And underneath that is the meta-narrative, God's salvific, God's plan of salvation. So his revelation, both general and specific, is revealed to us in his plan is revealed to us in his meta-narrative. And you see there's the redemptive historical movement that goes across the epochs, the times, the ages, the period. So you flow from a creation to destiny, to the parousia, to the second advent. You flow in this meta-narrative in God's plan of salvation, and it reveals more about God and more about his plan and his relationship with his people as these epochs and periods occur. And so underneath that meta-narrative is this next inner box of covenantal narrative. So you have the covenantal narrative is between God, the creator, and between his creature. And it's all about relationships between God and his creation. And that includes the Old Covenant and the New Covenant. Of course, we understand to be the Old Testament and the New Testament, but those are covenant relationships. And of course, we have the Abrahamic covenant under the Old, the Mosaic covenant, Davidic covenant. The Abrahamic covenant speaks to the law, the Mosaic covenant to the prophets, and the that's not a direct correlation. I'm sorry. Abrahamic covenant to the promises for the land and the seed and the nations, and the Mosaic covenant to the law, to the Davidic covenant to the kingship. And these are found in the law, the prophets, and the writings, the 39 books we have in our Protestant Bible, the 22 in the Hebrew Bible. And we see in the New Covenant, from incarnation to the parousia, the Gospels, the history, the epistles, the Revelation, and those 27 books, canonical books. And at the very bottom, in this, from all the death, burial, and resurrection is depicted in God's redemptive plan in his meta-narrative, all the way across the Old and the New Covenant. And from our origin at creation, in Genesis chapter 2 and 3, or 1 and 2, to our destiny, which we find throughout the Bible. And then the center speaks to this sort of, it's really systematic theology. There's 10 different elements of systematic theology. Harmatology is the study of sin, anthropology, the study of mankind, angelology of angels, pneumatology of the spirit, bibliology, the study of the word, demonology, demons, ecclesiology, the church, eschatology, the end, soterology, salvation, Christology, the study of Christ, and theology proper. And so it sort of gives a framework, and you're going to see I'm going somewhere with this, so give me a few moments, okay? A framework, when you examine your passage, it should, not only are you looking at that passage, you need to be recognizing how it fits within the bigger and bigger and bigger. How does it fit within the meta-narrative? How does it fit within the covenantal nature of the scriptures? How does it fit within the Old or the New Covenant? And these kind of things. And so it's not the passage in of itself you're looking at, it's the total picture. For example, and this is where I'm going to walk through example, and within this meta-narrative of God's revelation to humanity, there's different ways to look at various events or efforts, such as theology proper. And so as an example, I want to just break down theology proper, and I'll show you how we can look at some scripture in that regard. So if we go to the next slide, the next picture, and I know you probably can't read that. Oh man, I didn't realize I had this done that way. Let me do it this way then. Okay, so theology proper. theology is a study of God, right? Ology is study. Theos is God. So it's a study of God. And so there's various approaches to look at God or study of God. And one way is to look at his, I think the most important way is to look at his attributes. And there's various ways to look at his attributes. You can look at his absolute attributes versus relational. You can look at his natural versus moral. I'm not trying to do a class on systematic theology, but I wanted to bring this out because it does lead into how your passage fits in the bigger picture. You can look at incommunicable, that is those attributes that God has that cannot be transferred or shared with you and I, versus communicable, that is those attributes that God has that can be shared with you and I. And so this depicts it for looking at relational attributes, that is those that he can share, his wisdom, his holiness, his graciousness, his mercy, his righteousness, his jealousy, his patience, his wrathfulness, his loving. These are all communicable. These are all relational attributes that have a relationship with you and I in some form. Non-relational attributes are unique to him and to God, the Godhead, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Omnipotent, omniscient, those are not relatable to you and I. Immutable, that's unchangeable, not relatable to you and I. Eternal, we are not eternal. We have a beginning. So we cannot be eternal. The Spirit and omnipresent, we cannot be in all places at the same time. So if we were to understand, whatever methodology someone wants to use to look at God's attributes is not as important as the fact that God's, I'm trying to think how to say this, God attributes are a precursor to his actions. So the fact that God is wise, the fact that God is holy, the fact that he is righteous as his relational attributes, the fact that he is omnipotent, the fact that he is omniscient, the fact that he is immutable, the fact that he is eternal, those are the components that help us to understand his sovereignty, God's sovereignty. And so as we expand our chart, we look at the sovereignty of God. And when you think about God's sovereignty, you're looking at his controlling, his creative actions, whether visible or invisible, his controlling actions, whether to sustain or providential actions, his reigning actions as king or dominion to rule or as judgment, or his delegative actions. The Son of God, he delegates action to humanity, he delegates action to angelic beings. And so if you were to examine the sovereignty of God, and you examine the sovereignty of God across this depiction of my real estate agent is calling now. Across this meta-narrative of this, looking at from creation to the parousia to the second coming of Christ. If you look at God's sovereignty from the fall to the various promises, the Abrahamic, the Mosaic, the Davidic promises, under the Davidic promises, we got the nation of Israel, and the Mosaic promises, we got the Mosaic covenant, and the Abrahamic promises, the Abrahamic covenant. If you examine his sovereignty across that, and through the incarnation of Christ, through his death, burial, and resurrection, his ascension to the Father, through the inaugurated kingdom in this period, the consummated kingdom to come, with the tree of life and the parousia to come. All these are ways to depict God's sovereignty. And if your passage is somehow associated with that, and let's take an example and walk through, say, one aspect of it, creative acts. So in the creative acts, it's by the power of God that all things were created by God. Just verse by verse, that is. And so in John 1, verse 13, all things came into being through him, and apart from him, nothing came into being that had come into being. And God is revealed in his creation, the visible and invisible, Romans 1 and verse 20, for since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power, his divine nature has been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. And in God's Zechariah 12, verse 1, God stretches forth the heavens, lays the foundation of the earth, and forms the spirit of man. And his creation acts reveals his glory, his honor, and his power. Psalm 19:1, heavens are telling of the glory of God, their expanses declaring the work of his hands. Revelation 4:11, worthy are you, our Lord, our God, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things because of your will, they exist and were created. And God's creative acts provide the pathway to redemption, as Isaiah 51 and verse 10. So as we were to examine God's creative acts, both the visible and invisible, we can see in the visible, move forward here. In the visible, God created, the word bara in Genesis chapter 1, the heavens and the earth. Genesis 1:1, 2 Chronicles 2:12. He formed and established the earth, Jeremiah 33, verse 2. Humanity was created in God's image. I got to go on the next slide, okay. In God's image in Genesis 1:26, for fellowship with God, for the purpose of fellowship with God, to understand why God created us. It's an amazing study. You cannot understand God's purpose for our creation unless you understand God's essence or his attributes. Let me say it this way. God is a communal being. He exists in relationship before we ever existed. He exists in relationship with the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, a community within himself. And in that community, it's the love for the Father, the love that is expressed in that community with the love of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, but amongst themselves, and which, because of that, he created us. He didn't create us, and to understand that helps to recognize in your study of free will and predestination, and it really helps to go back to the essence and the being of God, the very nature of God, in order to grasp that. And anyway, I won't go too far on that. So where am I at here? Let's see. And so from the result of the fall, both humanity and the earth needed redemption, Isaiah 24:6 and Romans 8:20 and following. God's invisible attributes are clearly seen in his creation, leaving all without excuse, Romans 1:20. He creates a new person in Christ Jesus, Ephesians 2:15, by abolishing his flesh and the enmity, which is the law of commandments and contained in ordinances, so that he himself might make the two into one new man, thus establishing peace. In Ephesians 4:24, to put on a new self, which in the likeness of God has been created in the righteousness and holiness of truth. In Colossians 3:10, having put on the new self who is being renewed to a true knowledge according to the image of the one who created him. And he created a new heaven and a new earth for the righteous to dwell in 2 Peter 3, verse 10 and 12. And whether you look at the creative acts, visible or invisible, and what is seen in Hebrews 11, verse 3, by faith we understand that the worlds were prepared by the word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of things which are visible. God created all things, including what is not seen, Colossians 1:16. For by him all things were created, both heavens and earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things, thrones or dominions, rulers or authorities, that includes Satan, that includes the demons. Not that he made them in that state, they chose that state. But all things have been created through him and for him, for his purpose. In 2 Corinthians 2, verse 12, God created the heavenly realm, the third heaven. I know a man in Christ, Paul says, who 14 years ago, whether in the body I do not know or out of the body I do not know, God knows. Such a man was caught up to the third heaven. And Psalm 148, verse 2, verse 5, God created the angels. Praise him and all his angels. All these are invisible creations by God. Praise him, all his hosts. Let them praise the name of the Lord, for he commanded, and they were created. And, of course, humanity is to seek the things not seen, 2 Corinthians 4, verse 18. While we not look at the things which are seen, but the things which are not seen, for the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. So, okay, that's the big picture kind of thing, and sort of looking at just one component of the big picture. If you were to look at from God's meta narrative, his redemptive plan, and you were to look at God's sovereignty and the various components of that, and you look at his creative acts, his delegative acts, his reigning acts, his sustaining acts, and then so if you look at your passage, the question is how does it fit in that big picture? Now, it may not be dealing with God's sovereignty. Just an example, okay? But where does it fit in that big picture? What epoch, what time period? And is that something that was at the point that you're looking at the period of time you're looking at, is it something that's promised that's later fulfilled? Or is it the type or the antitype? Or is it some theme that carries forward and progressive in time? And let's look at an example. And that I want to use this example. I think, was this you? Okay. Eddie, did you bring out Exodus 19, verse 6 the other night? Was that you? I can't remember. Or was that Daniel? It might have been Daniel. I don't know. Somebody was talking about Exodus 19, verse 6 the other night. And I thought, oh, okay. Let's look at Exodus 19, verse 6. We'll look at the English. We're not going to spend a lot of time in Hebrew here. I just want to show how this thought process works. It's really, to keep it simple, it's really, as you examine any one context, one pericope, one passage, one element, one word, it's always in context to its nearest context and then to the bigger context. And the bigger context is not just the book or the chapter, it's the entire scriptures, all of it, which we see God's plan of salvation. We see God working through the ages and promises covenants to fulfill his covenants, and his covenants being expanded upon, covenants being fulfilled through Christ, and these kind of things. So in Exodus 19, verse 6, this is, of course, the people of Mount Sinai, Moses of Mount Sinai, and verse 5 says, "Now then, if you indeed obey my voice and keep my commandments, then you shall be my own possession among all the peoples, for all the earth is mine." This is Moses speaking from God's word. Is this God speaking to Moses, or is this Moses went up to God, the Lord went up to God, and the Lord called him and saying, "Thus this, you shall just." So this is God speaking to Moses. And verse 6, "And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the sons of Israel." And so the Hebrew up here, we won't spend a lot of time with it. Kingdom and priest, the last two words there, priests, Kahon, kingdom. Well, see, this is where I want to point, but nobody can see me point except for people here. So the third word, mamleka, leket. If you recognize the root, the mem, the lamed, and the kaf, that's melech. Well, melech is king. And so this word is kingdom. And then the next word is the kaf with the holum, the o with top, the hay with the hatef potic, the short reduced potic, kohenim, that's priest, and it's plural. That's why the eem at the end is plural, priest. And this is an example of a absolute construct form. So the priest is the absolute. Priest plural is in the absolute. And the word next to it, they're both nouns. Kingdom is in a construct state. And so this is the possessive. That's why it says kingdom of priest. Make sense? Okay. That's our grammar. But here, if we look at God's call to Israel as a nation to be a kingdom of priests, and this instruction, you find this instruction sort of building from Genesis all the way through Revelation. And so this call to the nation to be a holy nation and to be a kingdom of priests. So when you think about priesthood, the priesthood in Israelite nation, in Israel, you think about the head priest, the chief priest, who goes once a year to the Holy of Holies. Now that's not all he does. I mean, it's not a one-year job. It's like being a preacher. You only work Wednesdays and Sunday, right? He does more than that. But he ultimately, and then you have the Levite priests that work on a day-to-day basis in various functions and forms and other things. And I want to bring this out for a couple of reasons. So if under the concept of unrecognizing the kingdom of priests, and looking at the priesthood from Adam all the way to Revelation, some people will look at, say, like Genesis 2, verse 15. Let's look at Genesis 2, verse 15. And they would see Adam as a priest. And so the question is Adam a priest? They would see this type antitype, this picture of really Christ as in the priest beginning with Adam. I question that a little bit, but let's look at it. So in Genesis 2, verse 15, then the Lord God, there we have Yahweh, Yohei-Vavhei Adonai, and with Elohim, the Lord God took man and put him in the Garden of Eden to do what? Tend and keep it, all right? To cultivate and keep it, to guard, to serve. These are words, and we're going to look at a little quick word study with regard to tend and keep, to cultivate and keep, or to guard. These are words that are found, serve and guard. The Hebrew words here, shamar and aved, I have it in blue up there, okay? Those are the root words. Shamar is to keep or to guard. Eved, aved here is the verb form of your word, doulos, for eved, which is a noun form, right? This is the verb form, aved, avad, which is going to be to cultivate or to serve, to till, to work. So some will see that these words shamar and avad are, of course, they use a lot in Numbers. And what do you find in Numbers? You find priestly duties. Numbers 3, verse 4. Verses 7 and 8. Numbers 8, verse 26. Numbers 18, verses 5 through 6. And you also see these saying used in Genesis 2, verses 23 and 24. And so let's look at Genesis 2, verse 23 and 24. In verse 23, no, Genesis 3, I wrote it wrong. Genesis 3, verse 23 and 24. Let me correct that in my notes. Genesis 3, verse 23 to 24. Of course, we know what happened in Genesis 3, the fall. God cast out Adam and Eve from the paradise, from the Garden of Eden. And in verse 23, therefore God sent him out of the garden to do what? To cultivate the ground from which he was taken. And then in verse 24, so he drove the man out to the east of the Garden of Eden to station the cherubim and the flaming sword, which turned every direction to do what? To guard the way of the tree of life. So some people see these two words applied to Adam as a precursor or as a picture of the priesthood in Numbers in the Old Testament. And so when God created man, this is their view, he made him in the likeness of God, male and female, he created them and blessed them, named them that the man were created. And Adam and lived 130 years. He fathered his son in his own likeness, after his own image, and he named Seth. And so in this comparable way to how human sons image the Father, you see Adam images God as God's son to operate as a royal priest, warding off evil and working to see God's sanctuary and his presence extended throughout the world. Okay, so this is an example. I don't agree with the example, and let me show you why. We're going to carry it forward even more. So in Genesis 2:15, we got two words. We have this word to cultivate and keep. The first word is to cultivate, that is eved, avad, that is from the verb for your form, doulos, for eved, avad, to work or to serve. And we see it's often translated, I got it covered here, I didn't realize I had it covered, but it's the big blue, the graph over there is to serve or served or serves. It's the most, how it's normally translated, but it means to till, to toil, to work, or to serve. And it can mean to worship, or it's translated to worship, or to perform, or to cultivate, or do such and such. But on the right, the Brown, Drivers, and Briggs define it as to work or to serve. Now, work in some contexts is not the same as serving. Serving in some contexts is not the same as working. So you see underneath that, these various senses or contexts, it can be to worship or to serve in other words, 124 of the 289 times are usages of Evid, or Avad, excuse me. It refers to the sense of worshiping and service. Or 60 of those 289 times refers to the sense of serving as a servanthood. Or 36 of the times refers to minister, and 25 to work, and 9 times to do or to act, and there's some others I didn't pull up. Our passage is Genesis chapter 2 and verse 15, is literally to work. Well, so I struggle with saying, okay, it's a stretch for me to say, okay, Adam is functioning as a priest. This is what they're saying. Adam functions as a priest. Now, is it too much of a stretch to say he has, well, let me get there anyway. Okay, a stretch to say he's functioning. It's a stretch for me to say he's functioning as a priest here, because the word speaks about him working, not serving, not ministering, and not worshiping, but working, tilling the ground. All right, and so then the second word is to keep, that is to watch or to preserve, according to BDB, is the word shamar, and you can see it's most often in the blue in the graph to translate to keep or keeping or keeps, sometimes to observe, sometimes kept or guard or guarded or careful or watch or watches. So various translations. If you look to the left at the bottom there, it's 469 times. It occurs in the Old Testament. 238, it has the sense of observing or conforming to, and 48 of those 469 times to guard, and in 32, which is our case, in Genesis 2 and verse 15, to keep or maintain. So what's he to do? He's to not guard the soil, not guard but to keep or maintain the garden. And so I think for me, it's a stretch to say that he is a priest of God. Well, let me go a little further. It's kind of unclear how much we can describe Adam and Eve, or Adam as the first priest. There is some correlation in their function to keep and serve, but it's a very weak link in the text, is what I'm saying. But Adam and Eve were created as a royal role, just like priests were. In Genesis chapter 1 and verse 26 or 28, it talks about that they were to rule over the fish and the sea and the birds in the air and all the creation, rule over all the creation, all the animals. And so they have this rule, this dominion, extending their order that can be applied to God's sacred garden. You could see it as God's sacred garden because he guarded them from it when he kicked them out, because they were now filthy in sin in their disobedience, and they can no longer be it. So it is God's sacred garden. It's a paradise garden. And so you can see that they have this dominion, this rule within that. And so there's a sense that they have a royal role, in a sense that it could be a little priestly in a function, and because we can find links with their service and blessing and teaching, sacred space and holy living. But truthfully, these are expected from all of God's people to some extent. So it's difficult for me to determine if there's any distinctive priestly recognition here in Genesis 2:15. But yes, sir.
I understand what you're saying, but I look at Genesis 4, and it implies in Genesis 4:26 that Noah's grandson, Adam's son Seth, grandson Enoch, it said that's what men began to call on the name of the Lord from that point. So I look at this as pre the era of religion. That was a relationship with God, but I don't see that as being
So I agree with you. I'm not understanding. What I'm saying is that listen, we're not the first to figure out, hey, when we look at a passage, we want to look at that passage in the whole context of all Scripture, okay? So some would still look at, Exodus 19, verse 6, this priestly God, the nation of priests, kingdom of priests, excuse me. And they would look and go back from Adam all the way to Revelation. Well, what I'm saying back to Adam is probably pretty weak. And you mentioned Seth being, now, it's even there, it's difficult to say that Seth was functioning as a priest. There are some cases to say, well, okay, where did Cain and Abel know and learn to offer sacrifices? Those are priestly functions. Okay, so there are some cases to say, okay, there's some service and worship that he did, but to call him a priest is a stretch, is what I'm saying. Go ahead.
That the function that they did priestly, we can identify that, okay, here Cain and Abel did priestly functions, does not necessarily mean that they were priests.
No.
Yeah, so
no, and that's where I'm going next.
Yeah,
Okay,
right, yeah.
that's kind of where I'm going next. And really, the significance here is as we get to the New Testament. So this is just a journey. Okay, so I'm starting with Adam because that's where most people would start with priestly functions, is with Adam. And there's some sense that Adam did priestly functions, and in a sense, but to think of him in a priestly way is a little bit out of context, I think, and that's what I wanted to point out, okay? So that's our beginning. And so if we go beyond that and we look at Exodus 19, verse 6 as a kingdom of priests, and we look, and again, we're looking across that picture of all the epics of time. Melchizedek was a priest of God, and this was before the priestly functions, okay? But there were priests in that time frame. He's called a priest of God. And there are several Old Testament texts that allude to priestly functions. There's a need for a priestly mediator that's visible in Adam's sin. And because of Adam's sin, there's Cain and Abel offered sacrifices that we mentioned in Genesis 4. Noah built an altar and made offerings to God in Genesis 8, verse 20. That's a priestly function as a patriarch. He's not called a priest.
But he's called a preacher.
Oh, he's called a preacher, right, okay. A priestly function is really referring to the service and those functions that he did. Abraham offered sacrifices as part of his covenant in Genesis 15. Jacob offered sacrifices in Genesis 31. And the Mosaic covenant establishes this. You don't see the priesthood established until the Mosaic covenant, and a high priest is established under the covenant of Moses. And so we see the first priests were the four sons of Aaron. They had Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar. These four were ordained. They were selected by God. And the same time that Aaron was ordained, selected by God as a priest, as a high priest, Exodus 28, verse 1. They had priestly duties in general that fell into three areas, Deuteronomy 33, verse 8 through 10. They were responsible in conjunction with the high priest for declaring God's will to the people. They were responsible for, in religious education, to teach to Israel God's ordinances and the law, Deuteronomy 33, verse 10. And they were to be servants of the tabernacle, participating in Israel's sacrifices and worship. Several passages, so I didn't even list them. We find, though, as we move forward in the New Testament, the kingdom of priests in early New Testament period, both priests and Levites continue to function. Zacharias, father of John the Baptist, was a priest belonging to the division of Abijah in Luke 1, verse 5. Priests and Levites were servants of God, and from a different perspective, servants of the covenant. And they were mediators between God and Israel. That is a function of the priests. They were to mediate between the nation of Israel, the people of Israel, the people of God, and God. And of course, we see in the New Testament this mediator role of Jesus penetrates all of Scripture, looking both backwards to the creation and before, and that's where people bring in Adam and forward. So there is a sense that Adam himself had priestly duties, but to call him a priest is a stretch for me. Jesus is the full and final high priest of the new covenant who achieved that mediation with God in Hebrews 2, verse 17. He is not a high priest in the tradition of Aaron, which would have identified him with the old covenant. And that's significant, right? He's not a high priest in the lineage of Aaron, because that would put him with the old covenant. That would identify him as the priesthood of the old covenant. But instead, he's designated by God after the order of Melchizedek in Hebrews 6 in verse 20. So he is without a father, this is Melchizedek, without a father or mother or genealogy, and is neither beginning of days nor end of life, but resembling the Son of God, he continues as a priest forever. That's the significance between, of course, the priestly role or effort, a function, period, for the old covenant and the new. So where they would have to replace the high priest, Christ, of course, is one forever. And of course, this gets us back to what's really significant is not only Christ is our high priest, but just as in Exodus 19, verse 6, is a kingdom of priests. Israel was to be a kingdom of priests. This same kingdom of priests is now transferred or translated or extended to, is probably a better way to say, to all Christians being in the priesthood. Peter indicates that Christians are a royal priesthood. We know the passage, 1 Peter 2, verse 9, a holy nation. So, interesting enough, Exodus 19, verse 6 is the kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And what does Peter do? He brings us both into the Christianity, into the people of God. So God's people are always a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Always. Always have been, always will be. That's the point. Just as Israel and the community of the Old Covenant was called upon to be a nation of priests on behalf of all nations, so too are all Christians, citizens of a new covenant, called upon to be priests, understanding why, representing all mankind before God. We are mediators in the sense that in the Old Covenant, they were mediators between God and the nation of Israel. We are mediators between God and the lost and dying world and before all mankind. We are the mediators as our holy priesthood in service to God. That's kind of the thing I want to try to bring out here and looking at the kingdom of priests from Exodus 19, verse 6, in the scheme of God's plan, a redemptive plan. So from the very beginning to the end, priesthood was existing in the mind of God. And we see sort of the type and antitype even back to a sense from Adam. I wouldn't call him a priest, but he certainly had some priestly functions and service, just as all Christians do. We see that, of course, typified in the Old Testament and ratified in the Old Testament, but that is extended into the New Testament under the high priest of Jesus Christ and the priesthood of the people of God as mediators to the lost and dying world, just as the priesthood were in the Old Covenant was mediators to between God and Israel. That's a little different kind of study that I wanted to look at in terms of. I try to use De Roche's approach and apply it here to see how that would flow. But hopefully it makes sense. Any thoughts or questions? Because we're actually really a minute early. Unless you got more thoughts or questions, and we can talk for another 10 minutes.